The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 7th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of Jesus' disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" He said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition.'" Then Jesus called the crowd again, and he said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So I wanted to tell you about this experience I had the other day. I was at home. I was sitting at the table and working on something. And I remember I got up from the table. I walked into the other room. I stood there for a minute. I looked around and I thought to myself, "Self, what did you come in here for?" I had totally forgotten why I got up from what I was doing to come in here. Had I thought of something else that needed done in that moment, or did I need something from that room for what I was doing in the other room? I don't know. So I turned around, I went back to sitting at the table, and I never remembered what I had gotten up for ever again. And can I tell you what a strange experience that was? That has never happened to me before, and I've never heard anyone else say that's ever happened to them. I mean, I just thought maybe I should warn you that when you get to an age like me, that stuff like this might start happening, though I really doubt it will. Right. Yep. Okay. Before I get laughed out of here, we know that kind of thing is all too common, right? Whether it's forgetting why you walked into another room because there was a reason, probably a good reason, or maybe you forgot the 3 items that you were on the grocery list that you left at home because, well, there's only 3 items. I don't need the list until you get to the store and don't remember the 3 items. Maybe you forgot an important date when you were suddenly quizzed on it, even though you know it by heart. But as soon as you were quizzed on it, you forgot about it. But you would remember it all the rest of the time until it's the day after, and then you remember you forgot it again. We are a forgetful species. And that's why we show up here to church week after week and follow the same pattern and say a lot of the same things, so it's ingrained in us. That's why we regularly affirm our baptisms throughout our life and mark its yearly anniversary so we don't forget what it means for us and what God has done for us. That's why we pray to God over and over for guidance, for hope, and forgiveness. And then again for guidance and hope and forgiveness. And again, so that we remember who God is and what God does in our life. And I think this is why James takes the time to point this out to us in his letter we read earlier. In chapter 1, verses 23 and 24 that we heard read, James said that if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and on going away, immediately forgot what they were like. It's like James looks at us and says, what? Did you forget what you came out here into the world to do? All right, so we should take comfort in that. We're not the only ones suffering from short-term memory loss. But I think this is something that's asked of us a lot, right? This question of how often do we live one way during that one or couple hours of church each week and then live a totally different life all the rest of the week? How can we be this one person when we think God is watching or when we think others are watching and then be someone completely else when we forget that God is around? Maybe we call it short-term memory, or maybe we say it's putting on a good front when we need to, or maybe we attribute it to sin and evil. But nevertheless, we admit that we are broken and forgetful human beings. We can see who we are as children of God in one moment, and then turn away from the mirror, and completely forget who we are the next. So James went on in his letter, he said, "But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing." Maybe you've heard this before, but Martin Luther, our friend Dr. Martin Luther, was not a fan of the book of James. He just couldn't believe that it had been included in the Bible in the first place. He spoke against it time after time. Because think about it, before James, the Bible gives us all these other letters, many from the Apostle Paul, who is constantly preaching justification by faith, not works. The Apostle Paul would say that God saves us because that's simply what God does through Jesus. It's not a reward for something that we do. So I can see why Luther was frustrated by this. Because all these things that James is saying, be doers of the good works. All those things might sound counter to Paul's understanding of God's grace. But, on the other hand, because we are saved by God's grace, we are called to do these good works for our neighbors. I think we need to hear James's words. We get to be doers of the word and not merely hearers, as James said, because we were given birth by that same word, the word of truth. So James is asking us, he's calling us to remember who we are at all times. James wants us not to forget to live in this way. Because we know we will often look into the mirror and we will see a beloved child of God who has been saved and who is sent out to offer grace. And as soon as we turn around, we leave that all behind. So if we're called to good works, what might that look like according to James? Well, he said, "If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." Could it be that simple? Caring for orphans and widows in their distress, caring for those who are vulnerable, caring for those who are suffering, caring for those who need to be loved, all the while not giving in to the ways of the world, not getting caught up in the fighting and finger pointing, in the judging and division, in the competing to get ahead or come out on top. Rather, live in love with one another. Earlier in James's passage, we heard that you must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. People are watching us, right? You know that, right? There are people who are looking for encouragement in their walk with God. There are people who may not know the good news of God, but they want to see what it's all about. And so they look at people who claim to follow God. And they watch us as a church. They watch us as a set of individuals, especially when we claim to be religious or Christian or followers of God. So I think it's good for us to ask ourselves, when people see us, are they seeing people who deeply believe the claim that they are a beloved child of God and who respond to that claim by caring for those in need and not acting in the evil ways of the world that surround us? Or are they seeing people who claim to be religious and then forget about it? Or use that religion to judge and tell everyone else what they're doing wrong? We saw an example of that in today's gospel story. Right? The Pharisees and the scribes, those religious leaders who believed that they were the cream of the crop, they gathered around Jesus. And instead of listening and being slow to speak and slow to anger, as James would later advise, they were quick to point out what Jesus' disciples were doing wrong. As we heard, the disciples weren't following the Jewish tradition or laws. They had not washed their hands, thus making things, particularly food in this case, unclean. Basically, the religious authorities were saying, they're doing it wrong, Jesus. Why aren't they perfect like us? Why don't they know the laws like us? Jesus, shouldn't you be teaching them the right way to do things? Does Jesus get defensive? No, he quotes the prophet Isaiah, who says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines." Jesus does not tell them that the laws that they were trying to uphold are worthless. He does not tell them that their religious traditions are silly or evil, but instead he points to this idea that those scholars, those religious leaders, are too focused on the legalism of the law and being self-righteous and carrying it out, instead of thinking about how what they are doing does or does not point to the love of God. So Jesus then tells the crowds that what's important are the things that come out of us, because they are what defile. A lot of times when people hear Jesus say that, they think he's talking about the things that come out of us after we eat a big greasy meal. Speaking of, don't forget to sign up for a shift at the fair stand. But really, Jesus is talking about the words and the actions that come out of us. The love and compassion that comes from our hearts. The inclusion and encouragement that comes from our mouths. The concern and hospitality that come from our hands and feet. It's easy to forget that God calls us to right living, and that Jesus calls for his disciples to follow him, and that those calls are not about a strict moralism or having us judge one another to make sure things are done right. Instead, all of this is about knowing why we are who we are. It's about knowing why we do what we do. We cannot forget about caring for people in this world. We cannot forget to do the right thing for the right reason. We cannot forget about living and showing the love that God has for us and for all the world. If we keep those things on the outside of us clean, we know God will keep the inside of us clean as well. Amen.